they're my worst books. If they're your best books, it's not my problem. I don't know what to tell you. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Leandra the TBR0, and you have either stumbled upon or purposefully clicked on an intriguing thumbnail perhaps regarding my best and worst books of 2024. Every single year I organize this by genre, so my best book per genre or my worst book per genre. Usually they're separated into two different videos, and actually last year I completely skipped my worst books of 2023 because to talk about them just made me sad. I actually could not bring myself to exhaust you and exhaust me over books that I already talked about to length. So last year I skipped it, and this year I've thought about combining the two concepts. So really we'll be talking about every single genre I've read this year, my worst book of that genre, my best book of that genre, and I thought it could be really fun to just kind of do a bit of a compare and contrast. Really, I shouldn't have to say this, but you know it's coming because every single booktuber who creates video content like this has to provide a disclaimer. This just in, we have a live reporter, booktuber Leandra the TBR0, and she's going to talk to us today about opinions. Take it away, Leandra. My worst books of the year are a combination of 1, problematic content, 2, just trash writing, which probably shouldn't be published, and then 3, disappointing reads. They probably did still get like 3 stars, which is totally fine, but for me it didn't work. So those are my worst, aka most disappointing books that I went into in 2024, and also they're my worst books. If they're your best books, it's not my problem. I don't know what to tell you. You're totally okay with enjoying your books that you enjoy. I'm also allowed to hate the books that you enjoy, and vice versa. So speaking of, my best books of the year are my best books of the year. If I gave a book 5 stars and you gave it 1 star, then really I'm just sad for you. I'm so sorry that you didn't enjoy this book as much as I did, but we're also allowed our opinions in that way too. So please watch the video, enjoy my commentary on the books, whether you agree, disagree, or literally had never even touched this book this year. And maybe, possibly, going into 2025, you will take some recommendations and hopefully find some best books in 2025. Who knows? So without further ado, let's get into my 15 categories. You're probably thinking, what, Leandra, 15 genres? No, there probably are 15 genres, but I'm not covering all of them today. Instead, I have included a couple categories that are non-genre focused. For instance, a couple age categories. I have a best and worst of middle grade, a best and worst of YA. I've also created categories for cozy, paranormal, as well as manga/graphic novel, mainly just to encompass the spectrum of my own writing in 2024. So I hope you enjoy. To get the age categories out of the way first, my best middle grade was slightly hard to decide. I read some really great middle grades this year, including The Highland Falcon Thief, Amari and the Night Brothers. I also read Green Glass House recently, but for me, the book that I keep thinking about is one I actually read last January during TBR-a-thon, and that was The Deadlands. This one is actually called Hunted. I always want to call it Deadlands because that's what the series is called, but Hunted was so imaginative and intriguing. When I entered it, I didn't really know what to expect beyond the fact that the main characters are dinosaurs. So if you want more Jurassic Park feels, but bring it down to middle grade level and be in the POVs of these dinosaurs, I highly recommend it. It was really intriguing. It does get dark. Like, we see some death, we see some issues of like starvation, of obviously the end times of dinosaurs, but honestly the found friendship, the found family, and there are so many important themes about strength and patience and learning about your differences with other people and still accepting one another, and it's really beautiful. And this was probably my best book for middle grade because I still think about it today. And that's The Hunted by Skye Melky Wagner. And also thank you to the publisher, Henry Holt, because you gifted me this on NetGalley and I was just very pleasantly surprised. My worst book of middle grade was also actually a NetGalley arc, The Mystery of Locked Rooms by Lindsay Curry. I'm so upset because this is an author I've been meaning to try for so long for middle grade. She's typically known for her horror, and when I realized that she had created a mystery book, I was really intrigued, but I probably should have started with what she's known for because this one just fell flat for me. I found it a bit young as well, which is totally fine. I can separate myself and know that not all middle grade is for adults, but I also found the writing to just be a bit poor. It was rushed. A lot of the inside jokes and the humor didn't really match with the tension surrounding the fact that these young children in this escaped room house are possibly in danger. They might not make it out alive, and it just felt really weird for me. So this was a 2.75 and not a book I would recommend. My best book for YA goes to Ruin Road by Lamar Giles. I read this back in October during TBR Harvest, and it's featured in my vlog where I have booktubers choose a different number of pages for me to read per day, and I cannot express how pleasantly surprised I was. I always go into YA a little bit nervous, but this one had such important social commentary that I hope all YA readers do end up picking up this title. It follows a young man in his community, and he experiences racism, prejudice, judgment, and he makes a deal with the devil, wishes for something that he then immediately wants to take back, and that's to have people stop being afraid around him. That doesn't necessarily mean being afraid of him, although that is one of the elements that he finds that improves his life. However, he also realizes that it has detrimental consequences because people are no longer afraid of standing up on their roof, or no longer being afraid of being blatantly racist in public. So it's really thoughtful. I cried. It had all the emotions, and I cannot recommend this enough. Now for my worst book in YA, this is actually a great example where it's actually a pretty fine book. I didn't give it a negative rating, and that goes to For the Wolf. This was recommended to me by Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading for actually our prototype vlog when we were doing the Can We Trust series with a bunch of other friends on BookTube, and I had a fine time. It was great when I read it, but I ended up landing on a 3.5, so probably not something that I would continue because I know it's a duology, and I know that a lot of people really love it. It didn't really seem like it was doing anything impressive for me, and the story did drag on, so that's why I just kind of find it not very memorable. Now that the age categories are out of the way, what I've decided to do relatively is go from my least favorite genre to my favorite genre, and so you all probably know what genre I'm going to start with, and that is romance. So for my best book in romance, I think I realized I probably should have done worst to best, but we're just going with it on the list that I have in front of me. My best book in romance was If I Never Met You. This is by Mary McFarlane, and I ended up reading this as a buddy read with Nell Diamond and Danny Dabbles, and it was recommended to me by Caroline Crampton, my boss at She Done It. I really enjoyed this. It was so close to being a 5-star romance, which is very rare for me. I ended up landing on a 4.25, mainly because the ending felt really rushed, but I loved what this was doing as far as a main character growing, learning about herself, coming into her own skin, and also finding love along the way. It follows a young woman from Manchester who ends up having, I think it was like a 10-year relationship end abruptly, and now she has to heal and learn how to be comfortable in her own skin on her own without that person that she was so dependent on. And I loved her journey. She's one of my favorite main characters. I'm just sad that the author rushed the ending to be something really crazy when we were totally fine with the pace we had, and I didn't need the two characters to end up in the situation that they did in the end of the book. And now for my worst book in romance. Everybody knows what it is, or at least what the series is, because I did an entire video on it. For this list, I've mainly tried to avoid talking about sequels in books. There is, I think, 2 on this list entirely that I couldn't avoid talking about, and this is one of those exceptions. Heartless by Elsie Silver. It represents everything that is wrong with the romance genre. There are so many great romance books out there, and then we get this trash, and I can't. Especially when a lot of times the romance community of readers are mainly women, and then we're reading a book in which a woman author hates women. It is crazy. She writes misogynist characters, and I'm not going to get into it, but this is honestly the worst book I've ever read in my life, the worst series I've ever read in my life, and I would not recommend it to my worst enemy because I don't want them to hate themselves like Elsie Silver clearly hates women. Moving on, my next category is thriller. With my best book, I just finished it. A Solitude of Wolverines by Alice Henderson. This one probably leans more suspense, if anything, so under the umbrella of mystery in my opinion, but it can be categorized as a mystery thriller, so we're gonna accept that it's a genre blend. I ate this up. I read it in 24 hours. I had such a good time. I can't wait to continue the Alex Carter series. And what I love about this is it is a gripping narrative where we have like high action. We are worried about our main character as she is in this isolated community up in Montana, but we're also gaining explaining such important commentary on the environment, on conservation, as she researches the wolverine population at this preserve. And it was perfect, the perfect amount of learning while also being intrigued and just captivated. And the ending was just like high impact. It was crazy. I loved it. And my least favorite thriller was also a recommendation. I'm so sorry to my friends who are recommending me books that end up being my worst books of the year. It is what it is. I'm sure I've recommended books to you all that you have hated, so we're gonna accept it. We're friends, even though we don't have the same book taste. It's okay. But enough waffling, let me just tell you what the title is. It is Strange Sally Diamond. And Rainy from Rainy Blue Reads will back me up on this. She also hated this book. I just found so many issues with it, and it really, by the end, you felt like, what was the point? And also, why are these characters being horrible? Why am I being asked to be sympathetic to a character that is also terrible? And I think it sensationalizes pain in the same way that A Little Life does, in the same way that the girl who, what's it called? The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, all of those books that get really popular because they sensationalize pain, because they torture characters on page and we eat it up. It just makes me sick, and that's why this is my worst thriller. My next category is contemporary fiction, and this is a perfect example of how sometimes the margin isn't very big between my lowest star rating and my highest star rating within a certain genre. So for contemporary fiction, my best book ended up being The Rachel Incident. This was also recommended to me by another booktuber, the same booktuber who recommended Strange Sally Diamond, but at least you got a top in another category. Granted, I did only give it 3 stars or 3.5 stars. It's Irish, coming of age story, and I can totally see why Aoife from Pretty Purple Polka Dots really appreciated it. What she didn't know about me is that I absolutely hate infidelity as a plot device. It really frustrates me. I think it's a bit lazy writing, and especially when it's accepted by characters in the group and no one is acknowledging that this is a horrible thing to do to people. So that really kind of like grinded my gears and just left a bad taste in my mouth. Like, what are we all doing here? Meanwhile, my worst book of the year for contemporary fiction ended up being a 2-star rating, and that was If We Were Villains. I can hear people now saying, oh, but like on other review sites, it's categorized as mystery thriller. It's not. It's horribly mislabeled because this is just honestly a drama in homage to Shakespeare, which some people can totally vibe with. For me, I went in expecting some type of mystery, and then what ended up happening is this tyrant, a friend in the group, by the way, that everyone was friends with for years, suddenly gets violent and crazy. No one questions why he's like this. He ends up dead. And then everyone just kind of putters around and is horrible to each other for maybe 200, 250 pages. And then the author's like, oh, that's right, there's a murder that we're supposed to investigate. And we very quickly end up finding a couple clues. And then our main character, our narrator, who is basically Nick from The Great Gatsby, but make him 10 times dumber, he like continues to make horrible decisions, and I'm just like, why are we wasting our time? Like, what is going on here? So I just was not impressed by this narrative at all, and I'm really confused by why so many people love it. I get why they could appreciate it if they love Shakespeare, but I don't know. It's not a great book. Next, we have literary fiction. Not too different from contemporary in my opinion, but I feel as though in the writing style, you can tell the difference when you're reading something that's more literary versus contemporary. And for my best book of the year, I ended up picking a literary horror, and this is Green Fuse Burning by Tiffany Harris. This was actually during my reconnaissance for trying to pick books for the Amazing Readathon. I really wanted to have my best books, you know, my recommendations be in the spooky category, and I also wanted to make sure I provided like a spectrum of experiences. And this is by a queer Indigenous author. It's also a novella, so nice and short. And I loved how it was also a cli-fi horror narrative. So we're dealing with grief for our main character because she is dealing with the loss of a loved one, but she's also going off into the woods and realizing that her interactions with the forest around her grow ever more sinister and complex. And I really loved it, especially with how short it was. So yeah, I could totally recommend that to you. Now, my worst literary fiction book was also recommended to me by a friend, but this time it was because we were doing this taste test challenge. It was with Rainy Blue Reads. We had to recommend a book that we hated that we thought the other person would like among 2 other categories. And the book that Rainy really didn't like that she thought I could potentially appreciate is The Body in Question. However, I also hated this book, which is very funny. At least we can agree on that. With that said, I just found it to be a novel about horrible people doing horrible things. The trial was really interesting because I do love a trial in a book. However, again, we dealt with characters blatantly being horrible, committing infidelity, and I just was like, why are we here? So just know that about me. I hate when we have characters we're supposed to like committing infidelity. It's so stupid. Magical realism. Now, this is a genre I typically try to avoid like the plague because I find it really frustrating, and I think it leaves an author to simply do weird things without really explaining. Sometimes I'm cool with that. I don't need everything explained. But other times, when you can tell, it feels as though the author's just like leaving it up because they're like, oops, wrote myself in a corner, I don't know what's going on. That's when I have an issue with it. But for my top magical realism, hands down, no questions asked, this is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I was really lucky. I buddy read this with book lover Laura. Both of us had read 2 other books previously by this author, Sea of Tranquility as well as Station 11, and they do have certain overlapping characters, but they're all individually standalones and all very different. Like, one's is dystopian, one is time travel, and then Glass Hotel is very much magical realism because we do see suggestions of paranormal elements where characters are seeing things they shouldn't, and it's very kind of ethereal at times, but I loved it. The writing's great. Emily St. John Mandel is just so good, and she's really gripping. I love a narrative that also has multiple POVs where we're jumping around and then you're slowly seeing how all of these characters' lives are intertwined. That's exactly what this book does, so highly recommend. My worst magical realism book this year was also a buddy read, but this time with Danny Dabbles. We both ended up getting accepted for the ARC on NetGalley, and this book was The Peculiar Garden of Harriet Hunt, and this just got ever worse. There was a time, the first couple chapters, we thought, wow, this is actually really lovely. This is going to be a great book. And then the author completely derailed us by having main characters that do not communicate well. Like, they were literally having different conversations. Also, sexual assault was used as a plot device and handled really horribly in the book by characters. And the ability surrounding the garden, Harriet Hunt's ability to kind of control and interact with it, just fell flat and ended up not really meaning much. It was a train wreck of a book. I would not recommend it. I swear I keep forgetting that I own some of these books and I could be showing you them, but oh well, it's fine. I'm remembering it now. My next category is cozy, and that's going to go to A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I just love this book so much. The meanings behind it, Moss Cap and sibling Dax, their relationship, and the journeys that they go on, both physically and emotionally. It came to me at the right time, and then I reread it when I was feeling a bit down, and again, it just brought me back up, and I loved it so much. I highly recommend this, especially if you just need a moment of peace, as well as a short read and one that you feel seen, especially if you're starting to kind of question your own purpose in life, your own satisfaction with what you have. And yeah, it's so lovely. I can't recommend it enough. Next is my worst cozy, and again, this can also mean disappointing. It doesn't have to mean that it's problematic, it's heartless, but it can just be a fact that it was a fine book for me, and maybe that's actually praise, the fact that I really haven't had a horrible book in cozy, at least this year, and that will go to The Spell Shop. I am so sorry. So many people adored this book, and when I was reading it, I was like, this is cute. It's nice. But I didn't think it was that impressive of a storyline, and actually, by the end of it, I found certain characters to be very annoying, like the main character, as well as her love interest. I just didn't care about them at all. I was like, can we stop having this weird, cringy romance? Also, there was like a bit of trauma dumping, not between the couple, which you would expect, but our main character hears about the horrible trauma experienced by her love interest from other members of the community, and she's like, oh, okay, that explains a lot. Never addressed again. And I was like, you're not gonna tell him that you know these horrible things that have happened to him and you're just gonna move forward? I'm like, that is crazy to me. Meanwhile, I found it really distracting, and the entire plot line surrounding protecting these spell books kind of got fuddled. We switched gears when we had to protect another person, and I don't know, I just was surprised that this is so well loved, so it was just a 3-star for me. For manga and graphic novel, I definitely could have leaned on a few series that I've just continue to love, but I've decided to switch things up and choose a manga that I just started this year. I almost went with Dinosaur Sanctuary, shout out to Brittany Loves Reading, but instead I have gone with Cat on the Hero's Lap. I read the first 3 volumes and I can't wait to continue because it is just so fun. It's a relaxing read. Honestly, you can probably read it in maybe a half an hour, and I love the interactions with the cats. I love that we have this kind of D&D campaign and we're getting to know the villains a little bit more as the story progresses, and it's so fun. For my worst graphic novel or manga, it is going to have to go with Something is Killing the Children. I tried to read this. I was reading it for the Amazing Readathon. I was like, oh, this is perfect because they're going to be really quick graphic novels. But I read the first one and just found myself not wanting to continue. I was like, I could force it for the competition to support my team for Team Spooky. But I was like, I don't want to read it. I didn't find it fun. I don't know. Maybe it was too dark for me. And because the substance of the fact that it's a graphic novel, I wanted more on the page. I wanted more explanations for what was going on. It didn't work. So that was my worst one. I think I gave it 3 stars. So again, not horrible, just not for me. Next is my historical fiction category. And I will admit, my best book and my worst book in this category are historical mysteries. That's because I'm a big mystery reader. Specifically, historical mysteries are kind of my comfort subgenre at this point, and I just don't read general historical fiction really at all. I don't think I've read any this year, if we're going to be honest. But anyway, so my best book for historical fiction goes to Lavender House by Lev A.C. Rosen. This is the beginning of the Evander Mills mystery series. I've only read the first one, but I've been meaning to continue, especially because book 3 just came out. I believe it was this summer or fall. And I love the setting of 1952, San Francisco, specifically because this is such an important narrative following a gay detective and his own experiences with being kicked out of the police force, having to accept himself now that he is out, and people will be judging him openly. His fellow police officers also harm him at times, so be aware that there is police brutality as well as homophobia within the pages. But I found it really important, and I really enjoyed the discussions of Lavender House, what it represents both as a paradise, as a safe harbor, but also as a prison, because these characters who live in Lavender House can be their true selves, but they know that as soon as they walk out the door, they have to put on masks and pretend to blend into society, which is also really heartbreaking. The mystery itself isn't that strong, but I found the setting to be great, and that's why I also think it's a perfect example of a great historical fiction narrative. Now, my worst book, we all know, as soon as I say the title, you all know I don't like it because I've said it so many times. It was also one of the recommendations for me in Battle of the Booktuber. That is Dead Dead Girls. I gave it, I think, 0.75 stars. Just not a good book. I would avoid it, and we're just gonna move on. We have now officially reached the top 5 genres of the year for me, and can you tell? There's a book missing. Do you remember what that book was? This is an interesting test to see how well you pay attention to the background. Well, for my best book in fantasy, I'm gonna go with The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett, and I'm so excited for A Drop of Corruption, the second book that comes out at the beginning of April. I do have an ARC, so I'll likely read it prior to publication, but anyways, I love this book so much, and it is such a strong mystery because it is a fantasy mystery. The A-plot itself is a mystery, and it's just set in a fantastical world. With that said, the fantastical world is written in such a beautiful, eerie way. There are moments where I'm in awe of this community, and then there are moments where I'm terrified by the world, by the flora and fauna, and the utter danger that these characters know that they're in every single day, especially as you are closer to the seawalls. It's phenomenal. And then for my worst book in fantasy, can you tell I'm always so nervous? I just start lowering myself in the screen and make myself smaller. But my worst fantasy book is actually going to be a romantasy, and it's the only book I didn't finish on this list because I'm you know what? I got through so much of that book. I'm counting it as finished as far as for this list goes, and that is When the Moon Hatched. I got 40%. I could not get further. I honestly could not bring myself to read more of it because of just how bad it was, in my opinion. I don't really understand the hype surrounding this book because I don't think that the plot is really well written, and I think that the author tried way too hard to write beautiful prose when in reality she just was using way too many words to say something that didn't need to be said in more than like 3 words. Plus the main character wasn't likable. The death scenes went on for pages upon pages upon pages, to the point where I stopped feeling badly for the character and started being like, when are they gonna die? Like, they should be dead by now. Why are they continuing these conversations? Why are we using the terms male and female when the world also has terms like son, manhood? And you know, it didn't make any sense to me. So that's going to be a book that continues to baffle me with how popular it is. And now for my 4th favorite category of the year, paranormal. My favorite paranormal book was Grave Expectations by Alice Bell. This is a paranormal mystery. So again, we're seeing that I'm including as many mysteries as possible on this list as I acknowledge other genres. This was just so fun. I ended up reading Displeasure Island, the sequel that came out this year, and also loved it. I just think that it's a book that doesn't take itself seriously, and it does a really great job of including ghosts into the narrative where it makes sense. And I love the personalities surrounding the ghosts, and it's really fun. Again, the mysteries aren't that impressive. That's hence why it's not my top mystery of the year, but really it's the paranormal activity, the ghosts are what make these books, and I'll just continue to love the series as it continues. Again, I forgot to show you the books. This is Grave Expectations. This is Displeasure Island. Editing Leandra probably has already put them on screen, but I'm so annoyed that I keep forgetting to just show you the physical books so that later Leandra doesn't have to work as hard. But anyways, my worst paranormal book of this year ended up being Vampire of King Street. The reason why it's my worst book is because it's my most disappointing read. I swear, for most of the book, I was feeling like this could be a 5-star. I was really enjoying my time. I loved the main character. I loved how she was a lawyer in this like alternate history, New York City. Like, I think it was also in like the early 20th century, if I'm remembering correctly, but there were vampires. The relationship between humans and vampires was really fascinating, but then everything started to unravel the closer we got to the end, because I feel as though the author could feel that time was running out and she was speed writing the ending, because we were introduced to certain vampires that I definitely wanted more answers about. Now, it'll make sense if this is a series. The only way that I can accept this book as it is that it's a series. If it ends up being a standalone, I will be shocked. I don't understand why anyone would accept this as a single narrative if that's the case, because there were so many questions as we met more vampires from different time periods, as well as the ending, the reveal of who the killer was, of who the villain was really dissatisfying. There was no way we would have predicted that this person was the killer, and also their reasons for doing it was just wild and didn't really make sense. So yeah, I gave it a 3.5. I ended up buddy reading it very kind of like vaguely and flexibly with Danny, just because we happened to be reading it around the same time, and she liked it a little bit more than I did. I think she accepted things a little bit more, even though we both agreed with the issues that came with the book. So yeah, not a horrible narrative, but I feel like I'm being kind in giving it a 3.5. It probably should have given like a 3. Only 3 categories left, and the next one's going to be horror. My best horror book of 2025 of 2024 ended up being Into the Drowning Deep by Myra Grant, aka Seanan McGuire. I read this for another kind of Can We Trust vlog series. This was recommended to me by Bree from For Paws in a Book, and I loved it. I am telling you, I've said this so many times on my channel ever since I read this book, but Jurassic Park walked so that this book could run. Like, it's so good. It's such a strong sci-fi horror, and yes, there's the suggestion of mermaids, but it is sci-fi horror. It's not fantasy horror, so make sure you're going in with the right expectation. It's also a slow burn horror, so the tension is ever rising, and there's a lot of focus on the scientists that are investigating these mermaid sightings, but it was so good. I cannot recommend it enough. I actually want to reread it soon, but I'll hold off. I'll, give myself some time to like be away from the narrative before I pick it up again. And now for my worst horror book. This was also recommended to me by a friend on BookTube. It was Lauren from Happy Haunts Library. She recommended Monstrelio to me, and I gave this 1 star. I found it really disappointing. I probably could have appreciated the narrative if we only had the first section following the mother. We didn't need the perspective of her pining lesbian friend who's also fetishized on page. We didn't need the perspective of her ex-husband who is like randomly decided to be bisexual in the middle of the book, who also replays his own son's sexual experiences with his partner. Didn't need that. And then we also didn't need M, aka Monstrilio's experience of like erotic horror, where he like killed people while also experiencing sexual pleasure. None of that needed to happen. I know some people are going to argue that it's like literary horror, so it's meant to push the boundaries. Yes, but without being problematic. And I don't know, I have read literary horror this year, including Green Fuse Burning. It was my favorite literary book this year. Monstrilio made me uncomfortable for the wrong reasons, and no, I really did not like that book. We only have 2 categories left that include sci-fi and mystery, but first we're going to cover sci-fi. My best sci-fi of the year was one I just read in December, and that was Service Model. I loved this book so much. It was my first experience with Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I think it's really solidified that I love a robot main character, because obviously also on this list was A Song for the Wild Build. I really have enjoyed my experiences with Murderbot this year as well, and now Service Model has just cinched it. And it was also the first kind of full-length robot book that I've read, because the other 2 are novellas. So it was so fun. Uncharles is like one of my favorite characters. I loved his interactions with the Wonk. I loved all the social commentary in this dystopian world on like the climate crisis, on the issues of humans being the problem. We are always the problem for ourselves, but also everyone around us. And also the discussion of personhood. What does it mean to be a person, especially when we're dealing with robots who are ever learning and changing and reacting. And it was so good. I cannot shut up about this book. And then to die down my excitement, we're going to talk about my worst book in science fiction. And this was Cascade Failure. I ended up reading this also with Danny. I swear we read good books together. I feel like 3 or 4 times on this list, I've brought up a book that I read with her. Anyways, we're going to move past it. I read Service Model with her, actually. I should have mentioned that. So even though I've had my best sci-fi experience with her, I've also had my worst. And Cascade Failure was just a mess. First and foremost, I could never tell if we were going to have an orgy or not. Also, if there was meant to be familial vibes or, again, romantic vibes between these characters. The reveals of people turning on each other was crazy. And all of the characters that I thought were likable at the beginning of this book ended up being unlikable, which just really frustrates me, especially if you were to continue the series. You don't really know what to expect moving forward. It's just a hot mess. Gorgeous cover. One of the prettiest covers I've experienced this year. Not within. Just appreciate the outside. Do not get to know this book because its personality is horrible. And then finally, my best mystery of the year ends up going to The Hunter. I did mention earlier in this video that there were probably 2 books that were continuations of series that I'm just allowing myself to acknowledge and appreciate or put down. And the one that I'm appreciating is The Hunter. It's technically the 2nd book in the Cal Hooper series. The first one was The Searcher. I read that this year as well. And at this point, I know that this wasn't Tana French's purpose. This wasn't the way she was doing it, especially because she wrote The Searcher as a standalone, never planning to return to Cal Hooper's perspective, Trey and their community. But she does, and I think it's so worth it because I view The Hunter as being better, as being like honestly worth it to get through The Searcher to appreciate these characters. So now, in my opinion, The Searcher is a prequel. It's not meant to be a prequel, but in my opinion it is, because you get such a strong foundation about these characters. So then as they're going through the trenches in the 2nd book, you were just feeling for them. And I loved it so much. The Hunter is definitely my best mystery of the year. And now for my worst mystery of the year. I will say that I can't tell you what my true answer is going to be because it's for a secret video project. So you're just gonna have to find out on a later date. So I have a bit of an alternate situation going on, and my alternate for my worst mystery of the year is gonna go with The Murder of Mr. Ma. This one was just not well written. It was really hard for us to like appreciate these characters, especially with their like interactions. There was quite a lot of like absurdity going on where our main character is a detective, but he's also kind of a superhero. Plus there's this one character that speaks with a Cockney accent, and for some reason the author, rather than trusting us to simply know what that would sound like, writes everything phonetically to follow that accent. I only had this book physically, so I was dying every single time I had to try to read this book because it slows my processing down, and I'm like, just trust me to be imaginative. Like, I know that's a really crazy concept to imagine that readers can be creative and imaginative, but trust us. Like, we're trusting you to write a good book. Obviously that wasn't the case for this one because it wasn't good, but I was just like, that annoys me so much when I'm physically reading a book and I have to read someone's accent on page. Don't do it. All right, well, those are my best and worst books of the year. You have 15 books to potentially look into, get excited about, and then 15 books to probably avoid in 2025. At least that would be my advice. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you feel the need to defend one of the books that I've hated, feel free. I may not react. You may just get a heart message from me and we'll acknowledge it because our feelings are the way they are. But if you have some books that you absolutely loved and you want to give me recommendations for 2025, I would love to see them in the comments. If you're not feeling chatty, feel free to provide, I don't know, like an award emoji to the best books of the year, or maybe an X emoji to represent the worst books of the year. However you feel, I accept it. And also, thank you so much to my Manor guests, whether you are sleuths, witnesses, suspects, or corpses. I appreciate you all so much, and I hope everyone is staying safe this winter season as we are getting closer to the new year, celebrating, traveling with friends, family. Just make sure to take care of yourself as well. So anyways, yeah, if you're interested in seeing my past best books of the year from last year, I'll also have that linked below because why not? Always gaining more recommendations. And yeah, I do hope to see you in the next one.